I'm going to start with my guest and wonderful, wonderful person, Christian Crumlish. He's a product and UX leadership consultant at Design and Product, and is currently leading the product management of COVID-19 CA Gov, which is in California, and Cannabis CA Gov, which is also in California. He's been a startup mentor at Code for America and StartX. Formerly was the VP of product at 7Cups. He has also been the senior director of product at CloudOn, the director of messaging products at AOL, and was also the curator of the last curator, of the Yahoo Design Pattern Library. Wow, I remember that back in my UX days as well. Such a huge, huge resource. He is the author of the best-selling Product Management for UX People, From Designing to Thriving in a Product World, The Power of Many, and co-author of Designing Social Interfaces. With that, I'm going to pass over to Christian to share screen and get things started for today.
Thanks, Scott. Let me share my screen, and I'll mention, just as an aside, since we're talking to product folks, and product folks often sell things, that I worked in publishing quite a while ago and learned that there's no real clear definition of a bestseller because it's often in context. So I've learned to describe my book as the best-selling product management for UX people right out of the gate, just in anticipation or aspiration of the interest level that I think I'm seeing. So I'll get right into it. First of all, thanks for having me here. It's great to speak to product communities. My sense, as someone, it'll become clear from what I have to share, that I came into product management from a UX background, which is, and at the time that I did that, made that transition about 10 years ago, that was certainly not the most common, still not the most common pathway into product management. And there's quite a few. I never want to overgeneralize. If you meet product managers like UX people, they often come from a very wide variety of backgrounds, and even the short list of obvious ones, like from coming out of a business training, business school or business background, or having been a project manager, or coming even from, say, sales, business development, that side of things, or being a more engineering-based technical product manager, characteristic of kind of this Silicon Valley era of software development. I think that those are a lot of the paradigms or examples we see. And then folks like me who have a design or a UX background becoming product managers is a little bit less common still to this day. But that's my perspective. And one of the things that I've seen is that the UX community started pulling itself together and defining itself a good 10 or 20 years ago, and with mailing lists and blogs and conferences and community organizations and things like that. And I see that happening in the product management world globally as well, but sort of like about a 10 years behind, like that the conference circuit has been evolving, and there's a lot of great writing out there, for instance. And it's interesting to watch any community or practice pull itself together and to be part of that, and to have been part of too, has been really fascinating for me to look at the parallels. So it's a long-winded way of saying that I still, to this day, speak more to designers and at design events than I often do to audiences primarily made up of product people. And I welcome the opportunity to smuggle my UX point of view into the product mindset, as aggressively as I can, any chance I get. We discussed the format a little bit here, and I do want to leave room for Q&A. So I'm going to touch on my main head. So I'm not going to read my slides to you or things like that. The slides can be made available afterwards, Scott. I'm sure there's a method for that, or we can talk about that. Yeah. These are, essentially slides are main heads to remind me about points I want to make. I'll try not to go into my New York native mode and talk so fast no one can follow me. I'll try to stay clear. But I may not go, into the full depth on every single topic. The idea being that I'll cover the things I think we can talk about. I'll make some points, and then try to leave a reasonable amount of time so that the audience can determine what we dive into a little bit more deeply. And I think that's the benefit of having the Q&A process. I want to start a little bit by just clarifying at least my sense, my definition of product and product management and its relationship with design. I want to be honest about the fact that designers and product people don't always get along well, or that the working relationship is rocky in a lot of environments. I'm a consultant right now, and I'm often helping teams put together their product operations, their product strategy, the structure of their team, their hiring, the relationship between product and UX in the org chart. And so I've helped a lot of teams negotiate these turf questions or these uncomfortable assumptions being made sometimes about who should do what or who's responsible for what. So I'm going to touch on that for sure. And then kind of my third point is to talk about optimistically what can we do? How can we work well together? Where are the opportunities and the natural sort of alignment between the design mindset and the product mindset? How can we be, instead of stepping on each other's toes, kind of linking arms and making a real difference inside our organizations? That's kind of just an overview of what I hope to get to. So just a little bit about product. I mean, probably anybody who comes to an event like this is a member of this community. You probably have a pretty clear idea for yourself about, what a product is or what you mean when you say a product. By the way, I'm always talking about digital products. I just don't say that because I'm like a fish in water. I'm not really talking about this kind of a product, a sort of a 20th century industrial mass-produced physical product made in a factory that has its own unique tooling, where you can imagine you don't do continuous change. You don't commit new code every day or every week for this kind of a product. It's a very different kind of a thing. So again, probably everybody has their own ideas about this, but I think you'll find that not everybody has the same ideas, and that we often have these contingent notions of how we've been taught to do product, how it's done in our shop, how we want to do it, what we're trying to put in place in our organization. These things are not universal and worth, I think, discussing and unpacking, both so you can follow me and make sure I'm not making hidden assumptions that you don't agree with. But also, I'm literally trying to model that we all need to do this in our organizations as well. We shouldn't assume everybody else knows even what we mean by product. We have to come into the room a little bit defining ourselves and the whole picture. Here's the famous Martin Erickson beer or coffee stain, or Venn diagram on a napkin that I think is somewhat problematic. It's helpful in some ways. I think that on a very big, from 10,000 feet away, saying product management involves these three things is okay. On the other hand, I think that, and I sort of like to tease product managers, that probably every discipline can make a Venn diagram of overlapping concerns where they are in the middle and they're the junction of all those things. Certainly, when I was a UX person, we had diagrams like that. So I want to be careful about that worldview where you put yourself at the origin of the universe and everybody else is around you. Again, it's a useful shorthand for saying these are the pillars and we need to talk about them. You need to be conversant in these things. Nothing wrong with that. But again, this thing has gotten so much traction that it's generated like a world of memes and spin-offs and variations on the original thing. And that sort of tells you that it's out there functioning, but it's not really telling the whole story. And if you're familiar with Peter Merholtz, who comes also, like I do, out of the UX field and is a consultant these days on org design, he wants to redraw that diagram. He thinks it was a mistake to call the upper left one UX. He thinks that's really just design and all of its practices related to digital and certainly user-centered design. But that user experience is a lens that describes the experience that ultimately your customer has, and that the product that you're talking about in the digital context is the user experience. That would be his argument. And I think that there's some validity to that. And again, I don't necessarily agree with any one Venn diagram or a perfect model. Again, every company I consult with has some kind of diagram like this. One day I'm going to ask permission to share them all. Right now, they treat them as very proprietary, but it's interesting to see how these things get mushed around. But I think it's at least worth discussing. The key point, though, is that even if UX and product are kind of the names from two different disciplines for the holistic experience that the customer has, that they buy, that they value, that they hire to do a job. Even if you say these are essentially the same thing, that doesn't make the job of UX designer or UX strategist or UX practitioner and the job of product manager into the same job. We know they're not the same job if you've done either of them or worked with the adjacent person. You can tell they're different. So equating them is a helpful maybe statement about the shared interest in the outcomes and the experience and the value that you're creating. but doesn't really solve the problem in any special way. This is a diagram I also came across online that I thought was a nice reframing of that original Martin Erickson Venn to say that whole blob of UX tech and business really is just, sort of ways of making things that have to do with the relationship between the product you're making and the customers. And I thought that was kind of thought-provoking. Pardon me. Getting away from Venn diagrams, there's also this craft triangle that Geoff Redfern, who's a product executive at Atlassian, and was a product lead at LinkedIn, who shipped their original mobile app. So he's got some real serious product accomplishments under his belt. And he likes to talk about there being this a triangle of concerns where most of us come from one of them. We come from either a business background and know how to lead organizations and run things operationally and do people management and keep the whole ship on track and sailing in the right direction. Or we have an artist temperament and we look at things as a gestalt and we have leaps of insight and we can't always enumerate all the steps in the things that we're doing. But we're creative and we bring kind of like problem solving and also aesthetics and communication and expressiveness to the work that we do. Or we're more of a scientist type and we're very empirical. We like to see the evidence and we like to test our hypotheses and we're systematic about things and we look at data and numbers. And of course, these are stereotypes. Nobody's just exactly one of these things, but probably most of us would realize that we started off at our life, our adult life, our work life, our education, closer to one of these three temperaments than the others, possibly on one of the kind of spectra on the lines between two of them. But that to be a really great product manager, the notion is that you want to get somewhere into the middle. You want to get into a smaller triangle in the middle that partakes of all three of these things. And sure, you'll probably be in the corner of that triangle that's closest to where you started out. You were a scientist at heart, or you're sort of a business, you're a boss at heart, or you're a creative, person at heart, a visionary. Whatever it is, that will probably always still be your anchoring point. But you need to be conversant in these other ways if you want to thrive in product. That's the notion of this model. And what do product people actually do? And when I talk about product people, this is a little bit of a rhetorical sleight of hand, because I'm now not just talking about product managers, people doing the product management IC role or having a product title even. I mean, a product management title like product director or product manager, things like that. What I'm really saying is all the people on the product team. If we're saying it's all a product team, if we're saying the product lens is the dominant lens, which is what product people get to say these days, something UX people don't necessarily like, but it's the ascendant way of talking about the work that we do, then we have to acknowledge that the whole team is made up of product people, that the product managers are not the only product people on the team. The engineers are product engineers. They're not making embedded systems for toasters. They're not doing the engineering of the rides at Disney World. They're making software. They're making a software product, right? And your researchers are researching what we should build as a software product. They're not just they're not studying the ecosystem of the rainforest or something like that. They're researching to understand the needs to build a great software product. And UX designers who may have found at some point in the last couple of years that their title has been changed to product designer and are often scratching their heads and saying, what does this mean? Is this just a rebrand, or is this a mandate to do different stuff? Is this a lens I'm supposed to now use? Does this mean UX is now just taken for granted? What I say it means is that we're saying, look, you're a UX designer or you're trained in digital design and we're making software. We're making a product. We're making a digital software product. You're not designing a magazine layout. You're not designing shoes. You're designing software. So we're all and product manager, we're all product people. That's the first thing. And if we have a product strategy, it should be using the brains and the insights of the whole team, and not just something the PM does off in a corner and then endows the team with. Some other things that product people do and bring to the table that the other disciplines don't necessarily have going on, or that they're not always bought into, is this notion, this kind of lean or agile notion of continuous discovery, of build, measure, learn, building something to get something into the market, to put something out there to see how it behaves and how well it does, to learn from that and measure and get data, to understand, to have insights, to give you new ideas so you can build a new thing. These can be little experiments or probes, they can be prototypes, they can be a feature, they can be an A/B test, they can be a whole new MVP for a business you're trying to start. This notion of kind of quickly getting to action, building something, learning and feeding back can be very, very powerful, but it can also feel undermining to say UX designers who say there's no time there to actually stop and figure out the big picture or to research. This is constantly just following one trail of what you've actually got in the field, and it's not the only method out there. So it's both a value product people bring to the table, but it's something that doesn't have 100% buy-in from everybody else there. Product people also have to do this work, unless they are the engineer, where they have to be present and participate. The other people, particularly the product manager, but even if you've looked at UX designers, or like me, if you've ever been a UX designer, or if you are one now, you partner with engineers. You recognize that whatever you design in Figma or whatever the tool of the moment is only going to come into existence if an engineer builds it. So you need to have buy-in and support from engineers you work with. The product manager is also on the hook for what gets built. So they have a more intense relationship with engineers, where we have to convince engineers to be on board. We need their input, but we need their buy-in. And at the same time, if what they build isn't what we like, in some ways a designer can throw up their hands and say they built it wrong. My design was beautiful, but the build wasn't perfect. Whereas a product manager, as you know, doesn't get to say that. You have to own if something didn't work out, regardless of what the reason was. I've mentioned, I think probably everybody who works in product is familiar with this idea that you don't necessarily, you don't have hiring and firing power over the team that you work with. They don't report to you typically. You don't do the people management of the project team that you work with or the product team you work with. Everybody you work with has to be persuaded. They have to buy in. And there certainly are some organizations, and if you talk to the non-product people, there's a lot of belief out there that product managers are just dictatorial, and they just say no, and they just tell everybody else what to do. They make all the decisions, or they somehow hand down decisions from above that haven't been processed. And that's true in some organizations, for sure. That's the way product management is practiced. But still, it's really kind of often just a borrowed authority that isn't fundamentally there unless people believe in it. Because the product manager, again, it's kind of like, the how many divisions does the Pope have, or how is the Supreme Court going to actually enforce their decision? If people don't believe the product manager has power, they don't actually have power. So on some level, you always need you need a story or a narrative or a relationship with all the people you're working with, so that you're, they're doing what you want, or they're doing what's best that they've figured out with your help, really. We talk about software products, digital products. We talk about designing them. I think probably in the intro, it was mentioned that my consulting firm is called Design in Product, because I'm trying to say that design is something in product work, and that we're putting the design in the product. What does it actually mean, designing software products? So there's the design side, the people with UX titles, or they could be a strategist, researcher, they can be a designer. They can have a more specific design title like interaction designer or visual designer, things like that. But they bring a lot of things to the table that you need as a product manager. And sometimes these clashes or these turf wars about who's in charge of what, or a sort of diminishing of what the other person does to something superficial or brought in at the end, actually leaves out a lot of support that you can be getting from the design team or the UX team that you work with. So, there's, the UCD, user-centered design, inherently is a practice that involves research and understanding needs. It's a toolkit for problem solving that's recently been packaged for business leaders as design thinking, but it's really essentially a set of techniques that help solve problems, help figure out potential solutions, which is what product management needs. As many tools in the toolkit as possible to do. Understanding the user is the same thing as intensely focusing on the customer and figuring out why they're doing what they're doing. Information architects and strategists have abilities to synthesize whole systems and visualize them and diagram them, which is another thing that I think as product managers we often need to do and don't do, which is sort of visualize and make a map or picture or diagram that helps communicate to the whole team the essence of what we're building, not necessarily the UI or the data model, but the what of it, the human part of it, what it's like to move through it, what it actually does. All the techniques that, product management is so constantly a matter of prioritizing things, figuring out what to ship next, what to build, what to fix, what goes on the roadmap, what goes to the top of the backlog. And UX people do a lot of prioritization as well, because they're sort of often getting stakeholders together to figure out, exactly what to focus on. And there's a huge parallel overlap in these methods that we use that we could be doing together rather than in a disjointed way. And I wouldn't discount the fact that designers bring communication skills, whether it's visual or in words, but the ability to like help you make a great slide or figure out the right wording that will actually tell the story that will get executive buy-in and things like that. Okay, so I'm trying to, like I said, be honest and not just purely aspirational about like singing Kumbaya together and everybody being on the same page. It's often not the case in practice. When I consult, when I speak, some of what I get back from people is anxiety, frustration, pain, fear. Is my job changing? The UX people may have spent a decade or so making a case for UX in the workplace and getting their seat at the table, and then finding that now everything is being called product, and product sort of talks about UX, but maybe not as in a sophisticated a way as people who do UX all day long. So there's a fear that you've become marginalized, commodified, or just generally a sense of like, well, I thought we had established that I'm the person who makes the, who sketches out the wireframes or does the mocks, but now a product manager is handing me a wireframe and telling me to color it in. Sometimes one thing I hear a lot from design teams is that they're finding out about product direction once it's already been set, and they're really just executing like a production shop, like a hired team of graphic designers or something like that, that just figuring out requirements and the flow. Is it kind of is it actually a waterfall thing where you have requirements and you build them, or are requirements negotiated and figured out in some sort of agile iterative way? Often I think product managers can be sort of overwhelmed in trying to manage this stuff and haven't really laid out the process that opens the door to helpful conversations with other people who have input into these things or need to understand the requirements and buy into them. When designers and researchers present, when research presents its results, when design presents design ideas, sometimes they haven't bothered to learn the language of business or the language of product, and sort of stay in their design comfort zone and don't communicate as well and become frustrated when other people don't seem to understand or don't believe that what they're recommending is the best idea. This prioritization sometimes again isn't done collaboratively, but people are just told that priorities have changed or that something is more important than something else. There's often a lot of happy talk about how we're going to be a product team now, and we're going to have product mindset, and we have product managers, but the reality doesn't always live up to that. I think a lot of this again comes down to people not necessarily having ever discussed the reality of what does this role mean and what does that role mean? How are we defining these roles here at this organization? We come in with assumptions. We maybe discuss them privately with people we work with. We don't have an open conversation always with everybody we work with, and these things don't necessarily rise to the surface. Sometimes you have no support from your leadership. They're just throwing you into the pool together to sort it out. Sometimes you do have support from leadership, but it's not actually trickling down to your level, or there's no way to escalate back up to them that you're familiar with. But these are a lot of the kinds of things that I hear from teams that they're struggling with to get their work together between, just basically their UX or their design team and their product team. Okay, so where does this leave us? I click on the right screen. There we go. So how do we actually work together better? So the first thing is that we should actually think of things like turf and who's in charge of what, when, and things like that as not just received things that are already figured out everywhere, and there's a standard playbook and we're just following it. Or vaguely, so again, something from leadership that says, it's a diagram on a slide about what your methodology is, and that's the whole thing. I think what's often missed out on is that we have some work to do most of the time defining our actual work processes on our teams. And this can be everything from basic team building stuff, like people coming together and sharing about themselves, how they work, when they're at their best, how things go, what things are like sometimes when they're not at their best, what kind of support they sometimes need, how to communicate with each other, like don't text me at night, things like that. Those kinds of things could really be helpful. And often teams don't bother to stop and notice that they're new, or they had a lot of turnover, and that there's no team charter, there's no mutual agreement among all the people about how to work. It's just a zombie process inherited from earlier people in some sort of ongoing ship the Theseus way. And every once in a while you have to stop and say, wait, how do we work here? Maybe we all agree, but let's just say it out loud. And then if we do, great, short meeting. Otherwise, we may need to figure out, oh, I thought it was this. Really? I thought it was that. No, we don't do it that way anymore. When did that change? No one told me. So, a little bit of that goes a long way. But specifically, you can do it around the conflicting work itself. You could have meetings, and I have facilitated meetings between product and UX teams, small or big, where you go through and expose what are the assumptions. I thought you did this. No, I thought I do this, and sort those things out. Also, you don't need to necessarily get it right in one go. You're probably not going to, but you can start the process and come up with some sort of working agreement for now. And that may include some things you don't agree with, but you have to get to something that you can, collectively agree to temporarily. Then you put a marker down, and then you agree to iterate and come back later, do a retro after a while and say, is it working or not? And just like you would any other process or thing that you make. I said, worked with many teams with these kinds of things. I've never found them to sort out this stuff exactly the same way. It really does depend on who's on the team and what they're good at, and what's important to this team versus other teams. And again, if there was a one size fits all answer, we would just all buy that book and we'd say, oh, here's how I organize the team. The designers do this part, the researchers do this, the product managers do that, engineers do this. But it isn't that simple. These are broad things we generally understand, and we get very knowledgeable about them. We sometimes think there's a right way because a team we were on did it that way and it worked, but we forget, well, that engineer was also really, really good about understanding users' needs. Really, that one used to come to the usability test, or, sure, we had a product manager, but this product manager had, used to be an engineer, used to be a designer. So often you've got a mix of skills under the hoods of the titles of the people, and you have got to adjust how you work to the people you actually have with you. I'd say both the biggest deficit, like the biggest area of failure between product and UX teams, and I believe also the biggest opportunity for win, is around research. It's often where the two teams are really speaking a different language. There's a lot of frustration, researchers not getting their insights into design or onto the roadmap. Product people finding research to be something that delays or is too process heavy, and then they're handed like a 72-page findings deck and they're not really sure how to implement any changes or whether this rises to the level of something to change the plan over. The stuff I mentioned before, they don't always speak the same language. So there's a lot of pain, a lot of failures out there. But I think that the truth is that there's a huge opportunity, again, if you just say, hey, look, let's just start over. What's your goal in user research? How do you do it? How do you think we should be doing product discovery as a team? And then here, this is what I learned as a product manager. I need to get outside the building. I need to talk to my customers. So I like to send out surveys, or I like to do intercepts or whatever, and start to collaborate with the researchers who might say, well, surveys aren't always the answer. And just walking down to a coffee shop and showing them the mobile app, is fine, but it's just a single mode of research, and there's so many others. And start to collaborate on defining what the questions are. What are you inquiring about? What are sort of your research goals? What questions you're trying to answer, and then the best way to do them, and then partnering on the writing of the scripts or the recruiting. There's a good chance as a product manager, you're not as good at interviewing as a researcher is. You might ask leading questions, and they've been trained not to do that. You might feel like you need to talk, and they've learned to be silent and let the person think before speaking more. So, use their skills, but get onto the same page in terms of your research agenda. You can, again, leverage the skills of your design team. If you've got information architects or visual designers with data viz or information visualization skills, ask for their help in modeling the complexity and the systems that you're building and the relationships, again, for this, to get buy-in from the team so everybody knows actually what map are we on and where are we on this map and where are we headed, but also just to help bring coherency to things and to have a reference point that you can adjust as things change. I think as product managers in this day and age, we're probably all obsessed with data. We probably all have key metrics that we look at when we wake up or first chance we get on a computer every day or every time the data is refreshed. And there's a whole, sort of growth and optimization subset of product skills around using data to bring numbers up to where we want them to go. But often this can be overly empirical and abstracted, like the missing the forest for the trees. And sometimes we look at data and see it doing something, and we make an assumption or a hypothesis about why it's doing that. And then we start experimenting or trying to see if that hypothesis is true. But we could at this point turn to researchers and say, we see something happening, we have some ideas about why it's happening. Can you put a little time into unpacking that and figure out what's really going on? And therefore, we'll learn better and get past just the factual information, but actually the reasons behind things, the qualitative part, the human stories that are going on. And that can sometimes help us separate out kind of externalities we can't control from factors that we actually have some leverage over. And then you can sort of start prioritizing your experiments and systematically knocking off your best ideas. But there's sort of a missing piece, I think, if you don't do that qualitative research as well. I've mentioned this before. I think I don't want to belabor the point, but if you do prioritization, you probably know some of these methods: impact versus effort. This is an example from a project I was on recently where we sorted out impact versus effort, turned it into a roadmap, productizing a tool we built for the COVID website. A very simple idea, really. It's just a page feedback tool at the just above the footer of every page, an item that says, did you find what you're looking for? Yes, no. And if they say yes or no, it gives them a box to write in some comments. The comments are actually the interesting part. So we're turning this into a tool that any California government site can just drop in as a design system component and start getting page feedback, getting feedback at the per page level from their sites, which, I mean, you may not be surprised to know this, but a lot of the California state websites have no idea what their users think. They don't have, I mean, they have an email address in a footer or something, but they don't have any really easy way to find out all the time what users are thinking and doing. So if we can distribute this, anyway, that's the story of why we're productizing this tool. We made a very simple roadmap to turn it from something we made for ourselves into something that we can hand out to other teams more easily. This is all done in Figma. User experience people do this kind of prioritization all the time. My UX design lead was helpful in this whole process. So it's just like a very strong area of overlap between two teams, I think, where working together rather than stepping on each other's toes really pays off. So yeah, I think it's tempting. I think product folks, we often put our heads down. We're so obsessed with what we're doing that we sometimes leave other people out of the conversation, often not on purpose. Sometimes, yes, we don't want too many people in the meeting or too many people in the room, or not yet. That's understandable. But just be aware that if people feel like you're leaving them out of all the key discussions, they're not going to be happy. And frankly, you're then missing out on their insights and why they're part of the team. I don't think everybody on the team has to be in charge all the time or heavily involved all the time, but the team should be mostly the same people throughout so that you've got this continuity of understanding. And at earlier stages of the team, some people may just need to be informed and aware and not actively making decisions. Again, there's no perfect answer. You just work out, hey, this is how we're doing it right now as a team, and we're going to honestly assess from time to time whether it's really working. This does help with some of the hurt feelings and stepped on toes, but it's not really just about people relationship. It's actually the fact that you're not, the whole point is we're making software together on multidisciplinary teams where we have different specialties, but we're really one team of people trying to make one thing, a single product. And the more we think that way, the more holistic and unified and coherent the product we make will actually be. If we're a bunch of disjointed people with different ideas about who does what and how we're supposed to work, or mad because we didn't get to be in the meeting where the plan was made, then inevitably the product we ship is going to have that kind of, decoherency as one of its flaws. If you are a product manager and you think there is friction with your design team, that could be you being frustrated with them. They take too long. They want to do more research. Everything, they always say it depends. Or it could be a sense you're getting that they're frustrated with you, that they think you're tyrannical or that you don't understand them or don't appreciate them. Then I would put it upon yourself to try to heal that relationship a bit. Like you can wait for them to come and meet you halfway and use their famous UX empathy on you. And I do try to persuade designers, and if there's any designers in the room, I think you ought to do that. But since we're talking mostly product folks today, to product folks, I want to say, look, think of working with you as a product. Think of the UX team or the design team as a customer. If they're not happy, why is that? You would learn your customer's language a little bit. You would try to understand what their pain is, what their frustration is. You would redesign a workflow or an onboarding process or the content of a product if the people trying to use it were having trouble with it or frustrated or complaining about it. If you think of the relationship the same way, you've got like the huge toolkit for making that experience work better. And so do they, and they should be helping too, believe me. And you can set a good example there. But we're all working on the people and workflow level all the time, more and more, especially as you go up in leadership. That's what work becomes more than anything else. And I think sometimes we're not using our same exact skills, the same ones we would obviously use to help an end user get to a happy result. We somehow don't apply that lens to the more adjacent people we're working with together. So that if I'm going to preach about anything, it's that you should put some energy into that. I think this is just kind of my wrap up, that there's no one perfect answer. To work through it together, to work out your own approach for now. Drawing lines doesn't mean that you stay on this side of the line and I stay on that side of the line. It's just that you make it clear that for certain points, who decides what, so that you don't have misunderstandings. It's okay to have, to not agree about everything, and to even, feel like, that you may have to come back to something later to renegotiate it. But you do have to come up with some kind of working agreement for now, and you've got to be comfortable bringing things to the surface. Let me rephrase that. It's not comfortable to have awkward conversations about things you're frustrated with when you think somebody should be doing different work. It's understandable why people avoid these conversations, and you sometimes need support from leadership or from your organization to do it safely. But I think you have to be willing to go into that uncomfortable space to talk about the things rather than sort of avoiding them. When I worked in mental health at 7 Cups, we had an expression there: the problem is the path. And what it really meant was that often if there's a problem, and there's a natural human tendency to avoid it, to sort of wish it would go away or to work around it. But if you look directly at the problem and study it, the nature of it, the shape of it, why is it a problem? What's conflicting with what? The answer is often embedded right there in the problem itself. The problem is kind of telling you how to untie the knot or fix it, but only if you look at it closely, only if you're honest about it and face it head on. So again, that's why, rather than wishing these conflicts away or trying to talk past them, if we just have them out and say, look, I think we need to talk about this because we just don't seem to agree. What do you think? I think this. That will be, not fun. And sometimes you need someone like me in the room to help you referee. But it will pay off, and it will start a conversation that over time gives you a method for continuing to improve, how you work together. So that's my final sermon, and hopefully I did leave a little bit of time for Q&A if there's questions out there.
That's awesome. Thank you, Christian. Really, really appreciate it. I know we got one question to kick things off here, and I've just let people know that maybe we can open up the Q&A here for any questions that people do have. But OJ had asked here, what's the best way for a UX researcher and a product manager to work together in your experience? I know you touched a little bit on this maybe in part of your talk today, but there's lots of things here maybe I think you can comment on.
Yeah, I think you're right. I may have gotten to that a little bit after that question, so I think I laid out some of that. The first part of it is getting to that point where you are sitting together and making a plan together, which is often, you're not starting at that point a lot of the time. A lot of the times, either these things are happening separately, or the product manager is sort of, treating the UX researcher as a staff person to have tasks assigned to them, but it's not really collaborating with them on making a plan. So first of all, I think if you're the UX researcher, I think the question was coming from the research point of view, then certainly you do need the product person to get to the point where they will partner with you. That's a potential obstacle. If they're not, if the barrier to this is they're not even having a conversation with me about how to do this, then job one is trying to get support from your boss or whatever for a more equitable relationship. Let's say that there's at least, now maybe it's not completely 50-50, but let's say at least you're in the room together and there's a recognition that we've got research expertise on this team and product discovery is mainly a matter of researching and understanding. So we're not going to make a discovery plan without our researcher. That would be silly. If you got to that point, now you're in the room. That's job one. The next thing is to say, to try to offer to help create a research plan, which is what are our learning goals or learning objectives, and how are we going to go about doing them? And part of that is rather than saying, we should really do blah, 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 and showing that you're an expert and that you deserve to be there, you're functionally offering to create an artifact or a tool that will help the process happen the right way. And a product person often needs to dabble in all these things, but is not an expert on the best way to do a research plan, even the best way to do a roadmap. You'll find we Google that stuff, because that stuff changes all the time. So the greatest gift you can bring to a product manager is, I will sort of structure this artifact for you, with you, but I'll be the person anchoring it for you. And then suddenly they realize that they can not delegate it all to you, but follow your lead in the right way to do it. But at the same time, you have to make sure that their questions are getting answered, that you're not just coming into the room saying, I just have a generic way of understanding users and I'm going to just do it now. You've got to make sure that they feel like, because if they have their own research questions, whatever terminology they use, things they're trying to understand, hypotheses, and your plan doesn't really seem to answer that for them, then they're still going to go rogue and come up with their own half-baked ways of trying to answer those questions. So again, it is partly about merging the two points of view and saying, oh, good, I've got a whole bag of tricks. I have ways to answer those questions for you. I think this one should be, we should do some ethnographic research. I think we should do a diary study over here. I think actually for this one, a survey would be fine. No problem with surveys on this one. So if you help navigate that, then again, you're providing this service that helps them answer their own questions, they think they need, they think the whole team needs answered to do, to move forward with the plan. So anyway, more than that, I think it gets into the specific details, but I think those are the main pieces of it.
Yeah. And another sort of piece I always think about sort of from my past career is like really ultimately the end, three things you can really do help with a PM is save them time, make their job less crazy, less intense by taking some element of that off their plate. And the other part is helping them answer the two questions they're really accountable for in like Kagan's land of viable and valuable.
Right.
So ultimately, if you can contribute to that, you're going to help a PM be more successful in the work that they do, and you're going to help your product team collectively be more successful in the work that they do.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that, because there's a mirror image, which is I think a lot of PMs, especially if they're new to a situation, certainly in the school of product management that I would consider myself to be part of. One of the things you do is, rather than coming into the room saying, okay, we're doing it a new way, we're going to have Kanban or whatever, instead you often say, what does anybody need help with anything? Oh, you want me to go through the bug list? I'll do that. Oh, no one's actually written down how we're doing the charts now. Okay, I'll write a little mini spec. I'll interview you and I'll write down the new method for the charts. So whatever it is. And so that thing of being service to each other, like using your own skills that will actually take a thing off the other person's plate. Guess what? A lot of designers don't like writing documents. Like a lot of product managers are used to writing documents. They're happy to scribe a thing and get it down. Guess what? Product managers offer to make all the documents, but then they're overwhelmed and they're not specialists. So if you can come from the other direction and go, I'll help make one of those documents for you, because really the product manager was just trying to make sure it gets done, and they'll do anything no one else does. That doesn't mean that they're the best person to do it. They're just trying to backfill everything. So if you can again, make the research plan, or at least give them a proposed one that they can noodle on, that's going to save them time. And then they're going to go to you for help in the future, rather than saying, that person comes into the room and my life gets harder.
Yeah, definitely. I think of our own user research here, Productboard, like really helping kind of like educate our team on how to do their work better. They're really a grand facilitator in a lot of ways of that.
Yeah, I remember putting together back in my AOL days a product summit where we brought in one of our lead researchers, and she really explained that, like, we're here, like, you can bring us any question and we will help you figure out the best way to try to answer that question. So you don't have to come to us and say, I need you to do a lateral study of that. Like, you don't have to specify how we do it. Just come to us with what you want to know. And it's almost like these magic librarians, or magic kind of like this university in the sky that could just like find answers for you. If you think of it that way, rather than like something that you're, that somehow isn't doing exactly what you ask, making you ask us the right way, or giving you the wrong thing. I mean, again, people on the UX side sometimes can create barriers too, by saying you didn't ask for it the right way. Like the magic genie who, gives you a messed up wish because you didn't say it the right way.
Yeah, definitely. There's one question here of, what do you think is the goal of product roadmaps?
Oh, that's such a great question. I mean, I'd really have to say for whom, because I'd say product managers. Okay, the main goal of a product roadmap is to communicate to either people directly on the team or to stakeholders outside of the team, what to expect when. And when people ask for a roadmap, they are usually asking for a release plan. They're usually asking, when is a feature that I'm interested in going to become available? Because I'm planning a marketing campaign, or because I've got a client who won't close until it's available, or as I told my parents, my design is going to ship someday, or whatever. They're asking, when is it going to come out? And there's an issue in the product world, and certainly if you're connected with a company that makes product roadmap tools and things like that, you're part of that conversation, which is that sure, we need Gantt charts and project plans and release plans, because you have to have dates, and you have to sometimes have commercial relationships with dates and things like that. But that a roadmap isn't really that. The internal conversation with product managers, the roadmap and the release plan are two different things. And the roadmap is our plan for where we're trying to get to and how we think we're going to get there. And I'm in that school of folks that believe that you can't, the horizon gets fuzzier pretty quickly. So you have a very clear idea of what you're doing at the moment, the now area, and that you need to do some pretty clear thinking about what you're going to do next, because otherwise you just run off a cliff, right? You finish now stuff and then you're like, oh, where were we with that other thing? I forgot. So you're often working and prepping what's coming next, and you have to have a pretty good story about what that's all about. And then pretty much there's like all the other good ideas we might do someday, which you can call whatever you want, but it's just like this extended horizon that gets fuzzier and fuzzier. And depending on who's asking, you may have to have some more or less clarity out there, but it's not real. I think the problem is that how do you actually describe particularly the things you're not doing yet? The things you're doing now, you can say, we're making the whatever, but the next stuff is like, the big debate is often, is it a list of features? Our roadmap is next, we're going to build a login screen. And after that, we're going to build this, and then we're going to build this. A roadmap can be like that. A project can say, this is our priorities, and we're knocking them off one at a time. But it's often thought in the product world that a more outcome-based roadmap would be better, which is like, when this current period is done, this current period is all about helping people who onboard be retained. We're all about just making that first-time experience good. We want to get retention numbers up, and we found that if people are supported and engaged in their first week, so we've got all these different initiatives we're doing that are mostly about that, plus fixing bugs, plus that thing the CEO wanted, whatever, but mostly this. And then, but next quarter, we got to do revenue or something like that. So then you're going to have like in your revenue, sort of the next part of your roadmap, that next area, whatever, not necessarily a list of features, but a list of things you're going to need to do to shore up revenue, or a list of ways you're going to try to improve those outcomes, which will become more focused as you get into it. So anyway, I think this is a long-winded answer. I'm not sure how helpful it is, but I think it's important that, one, to have that clarity between when someone's asking for a roadmap, you should understand what they're really asking for. They may not be asking for what a product manager thinks of as a roadmap. And it's not necessarily that you need to argue with them or educate them. You might say, by the way, this is a release plan. Here's that thing you want. But you need to decode that part, because you can't get away from the fact that people do need to know, when is the feature X coming out. But a roadmap should not, you should have your release plan or your way of answering that question. And you should at least internally have a roadmap that is not simply a list of features and when they're coming out, but more like a list of priorities and when you're going to work on them.
Yeah, I really definitely agree. Like a set of priorities, problems, and a statement of the kind of intent and direction is really a critical part of that roadmap. But being able to provide that release plan or that other kind of view that people need inside the business is really critical as well. It's one of the key pieces why we've got Productboard in our case.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's built to basically enable you to deliver both those different views and different perspectives for different audiences.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those trade-offs you see, not to get too much into a tools discussion, but we're there. That the kind of if a tool, I won't name any names, but if a tool is like very strongly trying to tell you should do it this way, then it might not offer the ability to show it the way other people want to see it, because it's like it's actually got like an agenda that way. But it's often easier to use. It's less complex. Let's say more complicated tools are often solving that problem of internally we have to stay focused on outcomes, but at our VP or sales level, they want to know, when is the login screen going to ship. So we have to be able to also show them a more Gantt chart-like view of what we're doing. But data-wise, it's all connected. So now you got a more sophisticated tool, but it has a higher learning curve, or it's just kind of more features to master and things like that.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah.
I want to come to the Matt's question here. Any recommendations for building a better relationship with product managers for development-focused agile teams?
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, one thing would be to look at um, how right now you're doing. If you're an agile team, you probably have somebody who is a product owner or scrum master, somebody who is, kind of anchoring the rituals, the backlog grooming, the sprint planning, the stand-ups. And depending on your organization, that might be a person, it might be a product manager, it might be, a IC product manager, or it might be it might be someone on your team. But it feels like that role is a bridging role between the product strategy and the execution of the agile team, and that, because otherwise you could be like very empowered to do whatever you're doing, but you're not getting clear communication about what you're doing as part of a larger initiative. So that it's hard to choose the best thing to do sometimes. It's not just about the code or like the backlog. It's often about, well, what are we trying to do as a company? So there has to be some sort of conduit there that's relating that. Now, if your PO is a PM, then they ought to be relaying that. They ought to be providing that context in the, maybe once a week in the stand-up or something like that. Like, hey, by the way, there's a new initiative coming down or whatever. And if you don't have that, then your PO, who might be like an engineer who's essentially functioning in that sort of a lead, they might need to be trying to build those bridges to the product team, as sort of like the most product-y person, the person with a product title inside the engineering organization. I think, I hate to give a generic answer there, but it's kind of hard without knowing the contours of the actual team, like where the fix is. But and also, I hate to always go back to this, but a lot of it is just kind of raising your hand and saying, hey, how do we, as an engineer, I'd like to have a better understanding of the product, goals, and I want to be supportive of the product, strategy. How can we best be kept up to date on that? Because I mentioned before, remember, product teams often get very heads down, and as they grow and as organizations grow, another one of the pain points is often that they forget to catch everybody up on what they're thinking and doing and what's changed since. So everybody's acting on the roadmap that was shared at the beginning of the quarter, but you're 6 weeks in and a lot of things have changed. So really, like a product team with that size organization should have a once a month share out to like the latest from product. That thing we shipped, it made the numbers go up. Good work, everybody. Otherwise you're like an engineer, you never know what happened with the thing that you built. Oh, that thing we said we're going to do next quarter, we're not going to do it. It turns out NFTs are BS or whatever, and then you're like, and right now, here's the roadmap. It's a little different from what you saw 6 weeks ago, because remember that thing that came out of the blue? Well, we had to knock something off to make room for it, or whatever it is. So if you do that, if they're doing that more routinely, then you are getting that fuller context for your work and a forum for asking. If they're not, then at some point you have to maybe gently figure out a way to remind them that you're getting kind of inwardly turned and you're not doing your job of helping the rest of the company understand the product strategy.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. With that, I'm going to try to wrap things up. Thank you, Christian. It was really, really entertaining to talk with you today. And I really encourage people to check out your wonderful book. If you haven't seen it, you can pick it up at Rosenfeld Media. It's a really fantastic read. Of course, in the traditional format of all their books, really full of valuable information and takeaways on that side. We're going to give away 3 copies of this book to people that fill out our post-event survey today. So if you can take some time in a moment, I know Christian would love to hear your feedback. We'd love to share that book with you too. I think it would be really interesting on that end. So please get in touch and share your feedback. I've shared a link within the piece, but you'll also see that afterwards as well, post-webinar. And
yeah. I appreciate, by the way, for a product management org, I appreciate the attention to like, let's actually get some data on was this a valuable talk and things like that.
Yeah, totally. Like, we try to treat our community like a product, right? I mean, try to be constantly learning and help you be better at that side too.
And by the way, on the book world, outside of just pure self-promotion, I can't, it's not out officially yet. So I can only tease this, but I just heard from someone I know that there's a book on user research and product management, like a lot of those questions about how they can work together. There's a book on that topic coming from a press probably sometime next year. So I think in the next couple of months, the authors may start talking about it.
That's great. That's really great.
It's needed because I definitely am seeing a lot of those questions. And as we talk about these things, there's a lot of interest from user research.
Yeah, definitely. If you want to continue the conversation on anything, questions you might have, feel free to post those in our community. We've got some great upcoming events as well. Klaus Torns, one of our PMs here at Productboard, we'll be talking next week on democratizing prioritization. We've got Nicholas Jametta coming in to talk about mental health in product, just how we all deal with all these challenges on this side on June 30th. And Isla Liberato is joining us on July 14th on how to design your strategy. Lots of other ways as well to get involved in our community, whether it be our Maker Mentor program that just launched. A good chance to find your match between people starting this July. Our roundtables, which happen the second Wednesday of each month. Our Meet a Maker program, again, where you can meet other people in the community one-on-one. Or if you want to get up here and share your thoughts, maybe you got experiences to share and expertise, we'd love to hear it and invite you to become a speaker here at our weekly sessions. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us. Really, really appreciate it. And we will have this recording up shortly. And thank you again for the time and session today. Take care, Christian.